Mic check 1 2. It's the Y2K collector, and I wanted to have a quick conversation about consoles and video games that we eventually have to retire, right? And I think that this is such a important concept because there are consoles and there are systems that many of us still have in our collection purely for nostalgia's sake. But from a functionality perspective, they're just not the best ways to play certain games. Now, for me, I find myself asking, I'm asking myself the question as I look into 2024, is the original Game Boy worth purchasing? And for me, right straight out of the gate, I'm going to say no. I think going into 2024, I would put the Game Boy, the original Game Boy, probably in the same category that I would put things like the Atari or, just some of those older systems that are so old. The only people who will play them will be the people who probably played them when they originally came out, and they're just wanting to relive some of that nostalgia. Now, for me, the only reason why I still have the original Game Boy in my collection and why I'm going to be keeping the original Game Boy in my collection is because I actually got an original Game Boy when it first came out back in the early 90s. So for me, the Nintendo Game Boy is more than just a way to play Game Boy games. There's an emotional connection to it. There's emotional ties to it. For the bulk of my childhood, every summer camp I went to, the Game Boy came with me. And for me, like, my parents were not the type of parents to get me every new console that came out. So I was playing my original Game Boy when the Game Boy Pocket came out. I kept playing my Game Boy when the Game Boy Color came out. I don't think I wound up getting a new Game Boy, like an upgraded Game Boy. I don't even think I was still playing handhelds by the time I got a new handheld system. That's how far along, and that's how long I played the Game Boy. I probably played the Game Boy for at least 4 or 5 years straight. That was my only handheld console. So for me, having a Game Boy in my collection makes a ton of sense because I get a certain sense of joy out of playing it. Now, let's talk about going into 2024. If you're someone who's brand new to collecting, I don't even need to go over any of the specs of the Game Boy just to let you know that this is definitely not the best way to play handheld games. And in fact, it's probably one of the worst. Primarily because with this handheld console, there's really there's no backlit screen. So you're pretty much in calculator mode when you play this thing, and you really need to have like light at this level. You really need to have a literal light shining down into this screen. And I don't have batteries in here, otherwise I'd turn it on. I know, super lazy of me. You can roast me in the comments. But I don't have batteries in this because I don't really need them to show like what this screen is about. That you really can't see anything on this Game Boy screen when you turn it on without light. And so it's really just not the most comfortable way to play your Game Boy games because you are going to struggle. Now, the thing that the Game Boy has for it is like its beefy weight to it. It's the way it was designed, small hands and big hands can play this console. So that's definitely the good thing. But in terms of playing Game Boy games, if you want to start a collection and you want to go back in time and start playing original Game Boy games, my recommendation is going to be to go with a couple options. If you really, really want to play Game Boy, regular, like original Game Boy games, and you don't want to break the bank, the easiest way to deal with that is going to be to get a Game Boy SP Advanced. My preference would be the AGS model 101 because that is the model that comes with a backlit screen. If you can't afford that one, they do have the AGS 001 or 001, which is a little bit cheaper, maybe $40 cheaper than the 101, but it still does have some type of built-in light. The SP is one way that you can play your original Game Boy games with a better lighting system that's going to allow you to see the games. So if you want a cheap way of doing it, you could do the AGS-001 for about 80 bucks, 70 bucks, or you could do the Game Boy Advance SP 101 for around 130 to 140 bucks. If you've got deeper pockets and you want to spend some more money, you can always go and get an analog pocket. That is another option for you, and that screen is probably going to be the best screen available today for you to play your Game Boy games. Now, without doing any more jabbering blabbering, if you were thinking about starting an original Game Boy collection, I want to show you the top 5 action platformers on the Game Boy. For me, I think these are the best action platformers. I am biased because I did play these games as a kid. So again, you can roast me in the comments, but let's go through these and talk about some of them here. The first one being Super Mario Land. Now, we're all familiar with Super Mario World. We all know about Bowser. We all know about Princess Peach. We all know about this, the staple characters in the Mario Kingdom that, we're familiar with. Super Mario Land was a little bit different. The bosses in this game are not like the traditional bosses we're used to seeing. You had a lion, you had some moai, which are those large stone heads. You have different bosses at the end of each stage that do not really resemble any of the bosses that you would have seen in like the Mario World. And if I'm wrong, let me know down in the comments. If Super Mario Land and Super Mario World share enemies outside of the obvious, common ones like a Goomba or something, let me know down in the comments. But I always thought Mario Land was like a different spin on just the whole Mario franchise. And I played this game a lot. I would do speed runs in this game. I got to the point with this game where I could get through it without dying once. So this one was definitely a cool one for me, but I don't play it as much. And the interesting about Super Mario Land, you could actually play 2 players. You would just have to take turns. But this was a cool one. And I would definitely recommend that. Just a great way to experience Mario. I would definitely put that in my recommendation list. Another Game Boy game that I would have to recommend is Metroid II. We're all familiar with the Super Metroid series. We're all familiar with Super Metroid on the SNES. All the Metroid games that came out on the Wii and the DS. All of them, right? But to me, Metroid 2 was like really where it started. I think this is really like the real birthplace of the Metroid series because while yes, Metroid did start off on the NES, the Metroid 2 release on the Game Boy just took it to a whole new level in terms of level design, enemies, weapons. This was the next advancement in the Metroid series from the first Metroid game. And out of all the Metroidvania games, this is one that you're definitely going to want to have because this is a very large and expansive and fun game. This will take you time to beat. And I definitely recommend this one. And it's a little creepy, too. A little ominous when you play this one. I like this game. Metroid 2, definitely recommend that on the original Game Boy. Here's one that I carry a lot of nostalgia for. I've talked about it before. Batman. Right? The Return of the Joker. Now, for Game Boy graphics, I love the graphics in this game for Game Boy graphics. I thought that this was a very well done Batman game. The platforming in this game is good. Batman has his grappling hook, which is pretty good. Like the grapple hook works well. You got some batarangs you can shoot. This is a really good one on the Game Boy. Again, some of the Game Boy games were really limited, right, by the technology. But I love how certain games just made the most of what the Game Boy could do. And Batman was definitely one of those games. I like that. Batman and Metroid for that matter. Here's another platformer. Darkwing Duck. Now, of course, Capcom, when they combined forces with Disney, and they did that a few times, I think they did that a few times. There are a few Duck games that came out by Nintendo, but on the Game Boy Advance, Darkwing Duck was one of them. How many remember the Disney Afternoon? If you remember the Disney Afternoon back in the 90s, where it had a lineup of like 4 different cartoons, it was like Tailspin, Chip and Dale's Rescue Rangers, then like Darkwing Duck, then like Timon and Pumbaa, and as time went on, they kept on switching them out, right? If you remember the Disney Afternoon, then you remember Darkwing Duck, and this was an amazing game. Like, Darkwing Duck was so sick. Everything about Darkwing Duck The toys were awesome. I remember you could get the Darkwing Duck airplane. They sold that at Toys R Us for a while. I wonder if that's still around. But yeah, I mean, just the cartoon show was a lot of fun. So this is a great one. The thing is, this game plays a lot like Mega Man. It is produced by Capcom, and I think they use the same framework. They probably just tweaked, you know, the pixels and the sprites a little bit to make it more Darkwing Duck oriented. But this feels a lot like Mega Man when you play it. But this is a great game. I definitely recommend it. You could choose which area you want to go to first. I like when it gives you those options. This was another good one on the Game Boy. I definitely recommend that one. And then, last but not least, I definitely recommend Mega Man 2. The Mega Man games on Game Boy were great in terms of platformers. Darkwing Duck is a great platformer, but Mega Man 2 is a sick one. Each boss that you beat, you get to absorb their powers and use them throughout the levels. And in like a game like Mega Man X, maybe that's not as significant. But playing a game like that on the Game Boy, every time you can absorb someone's power and use it, oh man, that's like a ton of fun. Like once you get all the weapons and you're after the boss, that's really the fun of it, because you can use the weapons throughout the different levels. I know that there's some that give you like the ability to platform. I know there's some weapons that give you the ability to kind of like travel through air on the dog. I forget the dog's name. Somebody let me know down in the comment who this dog was back in the day. But Mega Man 2, like, it's like a robo-dog. But Mega Man 2 is definitely a good one. Recommend that. This is my childhood here, guys. This is my childhood here. This is where it all started for me in terms of video games. So for me, for someone like me, or if you're someone like me who grew up with a Game Boy, yes, purchasing a Game Boy in 2024 makes sense. But if you have no childhood experiences with this, do not buy the Game Boy. If you're really interested in experiencing and playing some of the original Game Boy games, my recommendation, go get yourself an Analog Pocket Pro, go get yourself a Game Boy Advance SP. Those will be the better ways of playing these games. But let me know what you think down in the comments. Do you think the Game Boy is worth buying in 2024? I'm interested to know what you think. I am the Y2K Collector with another run and gun video. Thank you everyone who's been watching and tuning in. Take it easy.